Yo, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to my studios. We're gonna be checking out Dawson Writers. What if Disney still owned Power Rangers? This should be a good one. Let's check it out.
Dawson's Rentals. Hey YouTube, Dawson Writer here. In today's video, I'm going to be doing another what-if exploration of what if Disney still owned Power Rangers. I did a video the other day about what if Neo Saban still owned it, kind of inspired by the news about Hasbro lately and how they've handled things, and people have wondered, like, what would it be like if Neo Saban had handled it? And I kind of talked about that, and this is kind of thinking about, like, what would happen if Disney had still owned it, which is a little bit different. And as stated with this video, there's no real, like, fact-based stuff about this video. It's just sheer speculation based off observations of the way times have changed with TV, based on what Disney did with the franchise. Just kind of a fun imagining, like, based on the circumstances we've seen, what could have happened. And Disney's a little bit different to imagine, because in the case of Neo Saban, I think Saban was always the one that cared the most about making the brand happen, because it was kind of all they had going on. But Disney...
To be honest with you, I think the Neo Saban era was probably one of the worst eras of Power Rangers because of his bad acting, and the 2-episode split per season was probably enough for us to stop watching Power Rangers altogether. And don't get me wrong, there are some good Neo Saban era seasons like Dino Charge to season 1 and Beast Morph for season 1. That was pretty much considered a Neo Saban era because of them talking while fighting still. But Dino Fury was pretty much a Hasbro season because of certain changes that the shows did ever since Hasbro bought the rights for the most part. But I think something tells me Disney is going to probably buy Power Rangers back, even though I really don't want them to. I think RBM, for the most part, was the best way to go out in style. But if they were to own Power Rangers still, we would have probably had some good PR seasons if done right. Back to the video.
Owned PR as Jetix, they still had bigger brands, but nowadays they own like two of the biggest of all time, the more important ones, Marvel and Star Wars.
Yeah.
So it's a very different situation.
And speaking of Star Wars, the acolytes I heard was pretty terrible, and episode 3 was worse. Episode 4, they started doing this whole pronoun stuff, and I'm just really annoyed because this is what Star Wars has become nowadays. It's all about the agenda show, not the show that tells actual stories about Star Wars characters.
Then they didn't really care so much about it. They didn't care about making it happen. They saw, like, hey, it'll do decently well on Jetix, and we'll kind of let it run, and it turned its profit for its time. But they never had, like, any ambitions, like, oh, we one day want to do a reboot show, a movie, we want to make the kids show better, we want to get it out there. They did the bare minimum, but they didn't do less than that. So it's a little bit different of a situation, and people always talk about how Disney hated it and they wanted to let it go. I don't think it was as malicious people thought. Like, the way people talk is like the Disney executive came in every day and like, I want that guy dead. It's like, that's not how it was happening. They just kind of didn't care. Like, they're like, yeah, whatever, let it do its thing. The thing that's interesting is the way that Power Rangers finally winding down there went down. Because from what I remember, the reason RPM was slightly retooled from the formula we got from roughly Ninja Storm through Jungle Fury was that they were going to pair it with Aaron Stone when they launched Disney XD, and then more or less at the last minute decided against it, which is why it was dumped at like the 5 a.m. slot on ABC Family until it died. And I think the reason that the reversioning existed was probably about existing contracts and like Bandai and all that stuff. Regardless though, it was just this weird thing, and when you look back on that, that's a whole other video I'm sure someone's done of like the weird history of Disney XD. I think it was meant to be like the boys version of Disney Channel. And, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I never
like
took that channel seriously because it was just not good.
Mixed. Nowadays, it seems to just be, like, an animated thing. Like, the only thing I've ever watched on there is Gravity Falls reruns. But I don't know. That was really weird. So that is something to consider, like, as part of the what-if timeline. I think, ultimately, in terms of my theory of where we would be currently if Disney still owned PR, would wind up at the same destination, but you kind of have two different timelines to look at for this. There are other timelines? Timeline 1 is simply things went down the way we know it, where after the reversioning it winded down, but instead of it going back to Saban, it just kind of laid there. So that's time.
I'll be damned if Power Rangers went back to Saban, the man that killed Power Rangers, the man that ruined the entire franchise by just having these unwanted fart jokes and all of this unnecessary slapstick comedy. In the Neo Saban era, it was just, I don't know what to call Power Rangers though, but I remember when Samurai first came out, I thought that it was about to be going back to its glory days, but looking back at it now, I really regret watching that show because I was like 19 when the show came out, but at the end of the day, I just think that no, actually, scratch that. I was 20 when Samurai came out, but I still hated the show because it was just goofy. It was just a watered down version of the Sentai. So if Saban would have still owned Power Rangers, the Neo Saban era would have still exist, and we would have probably had some of the absolute worst seasons and the worst 22 episode per season still, and nothing about Power Rangers will ever change. So that's why I'm pretty much against Saban buying Power Rangers back. Do not hand the franchise to that old scumbag. Don't ever do it.
That's where it happened. It would just stay dormant for a very long time. The second timeline is like, what if they had put it on Disney XD? Now, I really believe that if they had paired it up with Aaron Stone, I think it would have done pretty well. Like, not like it would have been a new era, but I think that it probably would have sustained effectively what Jetix was for a number of years. So I can imagine that PR would have continued sort of like we knew it on Jetix for a number of years on Disney XD, but I don't think it would still be going. I don't think, like, in this alternate timeline, you'd turn on Disney XD and see Power Rangers Cube Force or whatever. I think it just would have continued for a little bit longer, and then eventually it probably would have gotten phased out. But it probably would have given it like a stay of execution
Right.
if it had stayed there. I think that they should have just let it air on there. I don't know what was going on with that. I know they didn't care about it, but it seems weird that if they fully wanted it dead, maybe it's because of contracts. I was going to say, if they fully wanted it dead, they just would have kept things the same and let it die out on ABC Family. Like, assuming the reason they continued it through RPM was because of existing contracts or whatever, they would have just decided to get rid of it effectively immediately when they decided to do Disney XD. But the fact that they even thought for a second about, like, hey, this could fit, let's retool it, means that there was at least some level of care, I guess. Regardless, though, like I said, I think it would have continued.
You know, imagine if Power Rangers did Samurai, because a while back I did a video on my other channel talking about the interview with Hector David Jr. Shout out to him about how Saban changed the entire script, changed the setting, productions, because he wanted to, you know, have the show aimed towards 6 to 7-year-olds, instead of like having the show being aimed towards 11 and 12 or even 15-year-olds. So the show went from being ages up to 16 to 20 to 14 to 15. And that's why we ended up getting the worst version of Samurai because of Saban. And I knew from the get-go that it wasn't the actor's fault. Like, you can blame Saban for everything because we would have had a mature Power Rangers Samurai season if it wasn't for him changing so much. But if Disney did Samurai, it would have been one of the best seasons.
Of years, and then eventually laid dormant. Now, this timeline is kind of a fixed timeline where they can't sell it. So, like, there would be a boring point of this video if my speculation was they would sell it to somebody else. This is like in a reality where Disney would only keep it. So, but I think in both timelines, whether they let it lay dormant after RPM or it continued for a number of years on Disney XD, I think we would have wound up in the same destination where it would have laid dormant until the Disney Plus era. That's the interesting thing to think about in the Disney Plus era, how that would have evolved. Like, I think that the streaming era would have ultimately
or the
been one of
Paramount
things
Plus
that
era,
would have
because
caught
that's
up
what I would have
to the
preferred
timeline
to
where
go
it stayed
at.
on Disney XD and ultimately led to its cancellation. But I think that in the Disney Plus era, Disney definitely was looking for a lot of content to fill it out. So I think, presuming it was laying dormant, they would have maybe revived it for a Disney Plus show, because they have done that with a lot of other shows that you probably never even heard of. I think that there's a chance. I don't know if it would still be going on now. It depends on when they revived it, whether it was when Disney Plus launched, somewhere in the middle, or now. But I think at some point they would have attempted to revive it for Disney Plus, and it would have continued for a number of seasons. Depending on how well it did, I suppose it could have continued from, like, let's say the second year Disney Plus came out until now. That's a possibility. But for me, it really feels like one of those things that it would have revived for a few years and then also gone away again. I guess it also just depends on how well the toys did. Like, if they could redevelop that synergy with Bandai and the toys did decently enough, it could have been something that continued. But generally, streaming shows don't last an enormous amount of time nowadays. So that's really hard to say, but I really do think that there would have been a good chance that if they had let it lay there, that Disney Plus would have brought it back, because it seems like they definitely had this sort of ambition for a lot of content and a lot of names, and it feels like one of those shows that would have filled out like the kids' content stuff. You know, I see a lot of shows all the time, whether I'm scrolling through Disney Plus or you see like a tweet from a news site that's like, oh, Chicken Squad just got renewed for a third season, and you never heard of it, and they've brought in random new shows and revived a lot of old shows on there to give them content. So I think that would have happened. I don't think there would have been any larger ambitions. I don't think Disney would have tried a movie unless they did a Disney Plus movie or something, or comics. I think it kind of would have been roughly the scale of what we got, which in a weird way is kind of like this midway point between current Hasbro and Saban Brands, where Saban Brands did have greater ambition. Hasbro's kind of right now in the situation where they just want to do the minimum. Disney's kind of in the middle, at least in terms of what it was and what I
Think about it, between both companies like Saban, Hasbro, and Disney. I think what Saban was trying to do when he brought the rights back from 2010 to make it his own ambitions, to make it like Mighty Morphin, but it ended up being executed poorly and badly because of the way he ran Power Rangers down to the ground. And so, like you said, with Hasbro, like, they want to do the bare minimum of keep doing the entertainment stuff, as far as like doing the Power Rangers reboot, instead of like doing the toys, when Playmates are still going to be doing like most of the stuff or whatever. But as far as like Disney with Star Wars, they're pretty much just in a rabbit hole because of Bob Aker or Bob Iger, whatever his name is responsible for all of this agenda garbage that's been been fed in TV shows and movies, and you see how those shows turned out in terms of like the writing and stuff. Because I don't like to use the word woke, but it's pretty much the truth, honestly. If you go woke, you go broke, right? But I don't want to say that word, but you get what I'm talking about. They try to add their own little agendas, and it's not getting them anywhere. All of the critics from Rotten Tomatoes could say whatever, but the fans don't like certain stuff. Kill a franchise, you know what I'm saying? But I think what Power Rangers need to do, like I said, they should just go to Paramount Plus, because, like I said, Hasbro and Paramount have a good relationship with the Transformers and the G.I. Joe franchise. So I think they will fit perfectly. Like, you know what I'm saying?
They didn't have any bigger ambitions, but their sort of autopilot led to greater quality. So it would have been like higher quality shows and productions, but it wouldn't have been like they had like any ambition to go beyond that. But I think that's interesting to think about. I really do think that that would have been such a concrete possibility that it would have been a Disney Plus original type thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Though, like if it would have been
or
animated, or they would have tried to go back to the adaptations like it was. It just kind of depends on the changing nature of things. But there have been sort of shows in that similar style, like weird, like live action toku on like Netflix and stuff. So I could totally see that. But that's definitely an interesting timeline to think about. It's a timeline I wouldn't be mad about. Like, I would love for PR to get a successful reboot and break away from Sentai. But in terms of like the second best thing, I liked the Disney era. That's probably my favorite era. I liked the consistency of the shows. Like, if I had to pick,
yeah, the only thing I don't like about it was New Zealand, where they don't have a good equipment of creating good CGI. Yes, the shows were great, like Ninja Storm, Dino Thunder, SPD, RPM, and maybe somewhat Jungle Fury were the only good shows from the Disney era in terms of the writing and the story goes. And plus the fight scenes, they pretty much leveled it up in RPM. But Mystic Force and Operation Overdrive were the driving point of how to kill a franchise off because of its poor decisions and bad writing and all of that. And I kind of agree, the Disney era was probably the best in my opinion.
Roughly the same style every year. I definitely far preferred having Disney style seasons to Saban or Saban brand seasons or Hasbro seasons.
Same.
What do you think? Would you have preferred Disney to kept it if they would have been able to do something like this and brought it back as a Disney Plus show?
I mean, when you think about it, if Disney would have still owned Power Rangers, I would have pretty much had them focus on the production of the show if it was filmed in Canada or in the US, and then you add Power Rangers on Paramount Plus. Like I said, even though Power Rangers has some good seasons from the Disney era, but I would have pretty much preferred for them to actually go to like Paramount Plus. That's probably the best options in my opinion. So, what's your thoughts on this? Shout out to Dawson Ryder for this amazing video. Let me know in the comments down below.